The dust from the wagon wheels had barely settled when Eleanor Hartley realized her entire world was about to be sold to the highest bidder. She stood on that makeshift platform in the center of Tombstone, Arizona territory on a scorching June afternoon in 1881, her hands trembling despite the iron will she tried to summon. 3 weeks had passed since they buried Thomas Hartley, her husband of barely 8 months, after a mining accident in the Silver Hills left him crushed beneath a ton of rock. 3 weeks since she learned that every cent they owned, every promise he made, every dream they shared was built on borrowed money from men who now stood in the crowd below, eager to reclaim what they believed was owed. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Hoskins, who worked for the territorial debt collectors, cleared his throat and raised his gavel. Eleanor felt the sun beating down on her black mourning dress, the fabric heavy and suffocating in the Arizona heat. Around her, the citizens of Tombstone gathered like vultures circling prey. She recognized some faces. The banker Milton Graves stood near the front, his thick fingers laced over his considerable belly. Beside him, ranch owner Silas Blackwood leaned against a post, his cold eyes assessing her like livestock. These were men of means, men of power, and men who saw her predicament as an opportunity. "Gentlemen," Hoskins called out, his voice carrying across the crowded street, "we have here Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, widow of Thomas Hartley, deceased. As per territorial law regarding outstanding debts exceeding estate value, Mrs. Hartley's labor contract is hereby offered for auction to satisfy said debts totaling $1,200. The contract period is 5 years of domestic service. Bidding starts at $200. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to breathe. This could not be happening. In the progressive East, where she had grown up in Philadelphia, such practices had been abolished decades ago. But here on the frontier, in territories not yet granted statehood, the old ways persisted. Debt servitude, they called it. Slavery by another name, she thought bitterly. 200, called Graves immediately, his voice smug. 300, Blackwood countered without hesitation. Eleanor scanned the crowd, searching for a friendly face, anyone who might help. But the townspeople who had welcomed her and Thomas just months ago now looked away, unwilling to meet her desperate gaze. This was business, their expression said. This was the harsh reality of frontier justice. 400, came another voice from a man she did not recognize. The bids climbed higher. 500, 600. Eleanor felt dizzy, her legs weakening beneath her. She wanted to run, to flee into the desert and take her chances with the elements and the Apache rather than submit to this humiliation. But 2 deputies stood at the platform's edge, their hands resting casually on their gun belts, making escape impossible. $900, Blackwood announced, his tone confident. The crowd murmured. That was a substantial sum. More than most men earned in 2 years of hard labor. Eleanor knew what it meant. Blackwood did not just want a housekeeper. His intentions were far more sinister, written clearly in the predatory smile that curved his thin lips. Hoskins raised his gavel. $900 to Mr. Blackwood, going once, going twice. $2,000. The voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter, deep and steady and brooking no argument. The crowd turned as one, a collective gasp rippling through them. Eleanor's eyes snapped to the source and her breath caught in her throat. A man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a dust-covered shirt. A black Stetson hat shaded his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, darkened by several days of stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to pierce through everything they touched. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the leather worn but well-maintained, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable with violence but not eager for it. "Did you say 2,000, stranger?" Hoskins sputtered, clearly shocked. The cowboy nodded once, sharp and decisive. "I did, and I want to make something clear before we proceed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of bills, holding it up for all to see. "Cash money, no credit, no promises, $2,000 right here, right now." Blackwood's face had gone purple with rage. "Who the hell are you?" "Name is Jacob Mercer," the cowboy replied calmly, "and who I am does not matter nearly as much as what I'm about to do." Before anyone could respond, Jacob moved with startling speed. He vaulted onto the platform, his boots hitting the wood with solid thuds. He thrust the money into Hoskins's hands, forcing the auctioneer to take it. "That settles her debt with enough left over for your fees and then some. We done here?" Hoskins counted the bills with shaking fingers, his eyes growing wider with each note. This is more than enough. Yes, legally speaking, the debt is satisfied and good." Jacob turned to Eleanor for the first time, and up close she could see his eyes were not just gray but flecked with blue like a sky before a storm. For a moment something passed between them, a connection she could not name but felt deep in her bones. Then he looked away, back at the crowd. "Now here is what I think about any law that says a woman can be sold like cattle." He reached down and grabbed one of the torches the deputies had been using to light the evening watch early. Before anyone could stop him, he touched the flame to the edge of the auction platform. The dry desert wood caught immediately, flames licking upward with hungry speed. Chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered. The deputies rushed forward, but Jacob was already moving. His arm wrapped firmly around Eleanor's waist as he lifted her off the platform and set her safely on the ground several yards away. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the wooden structure with terrifying efficiency. "You are insane," Eleanor gasped, watching the flames climb higher. "They will arrest you. They will hang you for this." Jacob's expression remained calm, almost amused. "Let them try." He took her hand, his palm rough and warm against hers. "Can you ride?" What? Can you ride a horse, Mrs. Hartley? It is a simple question." Her mind reeled, trying to process everything happening at once. The fire roared behind them, people shouted, and this stranger who had just spent a fortune and committed arson on her behalf was asking about her equestrian skills. "Yes, I can ride, but—" "Then we need to leave. Now." He pulled her through the chaos toward the hitching post where a magnificent black stallion waited, along with a smaller chestnut mare already saddled. Jacob lifted Eleanor onto the mare with ease, then swung onto his own mount. The deputies finally organized themselves enough to start pushing through the crowd toward them. "Stop right there, Mercer," one of them shouted. "You cannot just—" But Jacob had already spurred his horse forward, and Eleanor's mare, apparently trained to follow, bolted after him. They thundered out of Tombstone, leaving behind the burning platform, the stunned crowd, and the only life Eleanor had known since coming west. They rode hard for an hour, the horses stretching their legs across the open desert terrain. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for the madness of the day. Finally, Jacob slowed his pace, guiding them toward a rocky outcropping that offered some shade and shelter. Eleanor's mind spun with 1,000 questions, but the first one that emerged was practical and immediate. "You just made yourself an outlaw for someone you do not even know." Jacob dismounted and moved to help her down, his hands steady on her waist. "Did I?" "Burning that platform. Taking me out of town like that, the deputies work for the territorial government, which operates under federal oversight," Jacob said calmly, leading the horses to a small seep of water in the rocks. "What Hoskins was doing, that auction, it violates about half a dozen federal statutes. I paid your debt in full with witnesses. Everything after that was just property damage, and since I happen to know that platform was built on public land without proper permits, that gets complicated legally." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "I am not as reckless as I might appear." Eleanor studied him more carefully now. His speech was educated, his reasoning sound. This was not some impulsive cowboy acting on romantic notions. "Who are you, really?" "I told you. Jacob Mercer. That is a name. Not an answer. He tilted his head, acknowledging the point. Fair enough. I am a ranch hand mostly. I work cattle drives, break horses, do whatever honest work needs doing. I have been drifting for the better part of 5 years ever since. He paused, something painful crossing his features before he shuddered it away. Well, that is a story for another time, perhaps. You carry yourself like a man who has seen things, done things. I served in the cavalry for a spell, Jacob admitted. Fought in some Indian campaigns I'm not particularly proud of. Learned that following orders does not always mean doing right, so I left, found my own path. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, the reality of her situation finally settling in. What happens now? I have no money, no home, no prospects. You paid an enormous sum for... She could not quite finish the sentence. For your freedom, Jacob said firmly. I paid for your freedom. You do not owe me anything, Mrs. Hartley. Eleanor, she said quietly, if we are going to be fugitives together, you should call me Eleanor. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Eleanor, then. And we are not fugitives. We are just two people who needed to leave Tombstone in a hurry. There is a difference. Despite everything, she felt a laugh bubble up in her chest, half hysteria and half genuine amusement. You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish. In my experience, those two things often overlap. He pulled some dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebag and offered them to her. You should eat something. We have a ways to go yet before we reach somewhere safe. And where is safe? I have a friend who runs a ranch about 30 miles north of here, just across into New Mexico territory, Cole Patterson. Good man. Honest man. He will give us shelter while we figure out what comes next. Eleanor took the food, realizing she had not eaten since dawn. As she chewed the tough meat, she watched Jacob move about their small camp with practiced efficiency. He was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 26 or 27, just a few years older than her own 23 years. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel safer than she had felt since Thomas died. Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. You do not know me. For all you knew, I could be everything those men said, someone not worth saving. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape. When he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. 3 years ago, I rode through a town in Texas. There was an auction just like the one today, a woman whose husband had died leaving debts. I watched them sell her to a man who, well, let us just say his reputation preceded him. I told myself it was not my business, that interfering would only cause trouble. I rode on. He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was raw and real. 2 months later, I heard she had died. Suicide, they said, though most folks suspected something darker. I have regretted not acting every single day since. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, moved by his honesty. So you saved me to redeem yourself. Maybe, he admitted. Or maybe I saved you because the moment I saw you standing on that platform so brave and terrified all at once, I knew I could not live with myself if I walked away again. Maybe it was not about redemption at all. Maybe it was about finally doing the right thing. Consequences be damned. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, the desert cooling rapidly with the onset of evening. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at this complicated man who had upended her world. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was a decency in him, a core of honor that shone through despite whatever darkness he had seen or done. Tell me about your husband, Jacob said eventually. If you want to, I mean. Sometimes talking helps. Eleanor considered declining, but something about the quiet intimacy of their situation made her want to share. Thomas was a dreamer. He had such grand plans, such ambitions. When he proposed, he promised me a life of adventure and prosperity. We would come west, he said, make our fortune in the silver mines, build an empire. She smiled sadly. He was a terrible judge of investments and an even worse businessman. Within months, we were drowning in debt. But he kept promising it would all work out right up until the day the mine shaft collapsed. Did you love him? The question was blunt, but not unkind. Eleanor thought about it honestly. I cared for him. I respected his dreams even if I questioned his methods. But love? Real, deep, soul-shaking love? No, I do not think so. We barely knew each other when we married. I was young and eager to escape my overbearing parents. He was charming and persuasive. It seemed like enough at the time. Jacob nodded slowly. At least you're honest about it. That counts for something. What about you? Eleanor asked. Has there been someone? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Once, long time ago, she died of cholera during an outbreak at Fort Grant. We were supposed to marry that spring. He shook his head. After that, I decided it was easier to keep moving, never stay anywhere long enough to put down roots. Fewer things to lose that way. That sounds lonely. It has been, he admitted quietly, but safe. Or so I thought until today. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. A flutter of possibility she had not expected. This man had saved her, yes, but more than that, he had seen her as worth saving. In a world that had reduced her to a commodity, he had treated her as a person deserving of dignity and freedom. We should rest, Jacob said, breaking the moment. We will need to leave before dawn if we want to reach Cole's ranch by tomorrow evening. He fashioned a sleeping area for her using saddle blankets and his own bedroll, insisting she take them while he would keep watch. Eleanor protested, but he was adamant, and she was too exhausted to argue forcefully. She lay down under the emerging stars, her body aching from the ride and the emotional turmoil of the day. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Jacob's voice, soft and almost singing, a cowboy ballad about endless prairies and freedom. The sound was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt something like peace. She woke several times during the night, always to find Jacob alert and watchful, a dark silhouette against the starlight. Each time, his presence calmed her, and she slipped back into sleep. They rose before sunrise, eating a quick breakfast of coffee and more hardtack before saddling the horses. The ride that day was less frantic, though they maintained a steady pace. Jacob proved to be an excellent traveling companion, pointing out features of the landscape, sharing stories of his wanderings, and asking questions about her life in Philadelphia that showed genuine interest. "What do you miss most about the East?" he asked, as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. "Libraries," Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Books, newspapers, the feeling of being connected to the wider world. Out here, everything feels so isolated, so cut off." "There are towns with libraries even out here," Jacob said. "Santa Fe has a fine collection. So does Denver. The West is not all dusty cow towns and mining camps." "Have you been to those places?" "Denver twice, Santa Fe more times than I can count. Beautiful city, Santa Fe. Old Spanish architecture, art, culture. You would like it." They talked about books then. Discovering a shared love of adventure novels and poetry, Jacob surprised her by quoting Whitman from memory, his deep voice giving weight to the verses about the open road and endless possibilities. As the day wore on, Eleanor found herself relaxing in ways she had not since before Thomas died. Jacob was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and thoughtful in his observations. He treated her as an equal, never condescending or presumptuous. When her horse stumbled slightly on loose rock, he was immediately attentive, checking both Eleanor and the mare for injury with gentle, capable hands. "You are good with animals," she observed. "Spent most of my life around them," Jacob replied. "Horses are honest. They do not lie or scheme or pretend to be something they are not. I appreciate that." Unlike some people, he corrected. "Others are just as honest, just as true. You just have to find them." By late afternoon, they crested a rise and saw the Patterson Ranch spread out in the valley below. It was a substantial operation with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals filled with cattle and horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, a welcoming sign of habitation and warmth. As they rode down the slope, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. He was stocky and bearded, probably in his early 40s, with the bow-legged gait of someone who had spent a lifetime on horseback. "Jake Mercer," the man called out, his voice booming with pleasure. "I will be damned! What brings you to my doorstep?" Jacob dismounted and clasped hands with the man, their greeting full of genuine affection. "Cole, good to see you. I hope we are not imposing, but we could use a safe place to rest for a spell." Cole's eyes moved to Eleanor, curiosity and concern mixing in his expression. "We?" Jacob helped Eleanor down from her horse and made introductions. "Cole Patterson, this is Eleanor Hartley. Eleanor, Cole is one of the few men in this territory I would trust with my life." "And he has, on more than one occasion," Cole said, tipping his hat to Eleanor. "Ma'am, any friend of Jake's is welcome here. Though I confess, I'm curious about the circumstances that bring you both to my ranch looking like you have been riding hard." "It is a complicated story," Jacob began, but Cole held up his hand. "Then it can wait until you have both cleaned up and had a proper meal. My wife Martha will have my hide if I keep guests standing in the yard." He gestured toward the house. "Come on, let us get you settled." Martha Patterson turned out to be a warm, bustling woman with graying hair and kind eyes who immediately took Eleanor under her wing. She insisted on drawing a hot bath, providing fresh clothes, and treating Eleanor like a long-lost daughter rather than an unexpected guest. As Eleanor sank into the copper tub in the small bathing room off the kitchen, she felt weeks of grime and tension wash away. Martha had provided rose-scented soap, a luxury Eleanor had not experienced since leaving Philadelphia, and she scrubbed herself clean while tears of relief slid down her cheeks. When she emerged, dressed in a simple calico dress Martha had loaned her, she found the household gathered around a large dining table laden with food. Besides Cole and Martha, there were two ranch hands eating at one end, both young men who nodded politely but kept to themselves. Jacob had cleaned up as well, his face freshly shaved and his hair damp from washing. He looked younger without the stubble, and when he smiled at her across the table, Eleanor felt her heart skip strangely. Over dinner of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, Jacob explained the situation in Tombstone. Cole and Martha listened with increasing outrage, Martha's face growing redder with each detail. "That is barbaric," Martha declared when Jacob finished. "Those men should be ashamed, and that auctioneer should be in jail." "They were acting within territorial law, technically," Cole said, though his tone made clear what he thought of such laws. "But Jake did right. He always does, even when it costs him." "The question now is what comes next," Jacob said, looking at Eleanor. "I meant what I said. You are free to make your own choices, but you are also welcome to stay here as long as you need while you figure out what you want to do." Cole nodded firmly. "Absolutely. We always have need of help around the ranch, and Martha has been saying she wants someone to assist with the kitchen garden and the preserving. We could offer you honest work for honest wages if you are interested." Eleanor felt overwhelmed by their kindness. "I do not know what to say. You do not even know me, and yet you are offering so much." "We know Jake vouches for you," Martha said simply. "That's enough for us. Besides, any woman who survived what you have been through deserves a chance to build something better." Eleanor looked at Jacob, this man who had ridden into her life like something out of a dime novel and changed everything. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of it. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "There is nothing to repay," Jacob insisted. "Just promise me you will build the life you deserve, whatever that looks like." Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into life at the Patterson Ranch. She helped Martha with the household work, tended the vegetable garden, and even learned to churn butter and make cheese. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in her adult life, Eleanor felt like she was building something real, something that belonged to her. Jacob stayed as well, taking work as a hand with the cattle. He and Cole spent long days riding the range, checking fences, and moving herds to better pasture. But every evening, he made sure to spend time with Eleanor, and their friendship deepened into something neither of them quite wanted to name yet. They would sit on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, talking about everything and nothing. Jacob told her about his childhood on a small farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to influenza when he was 16, about drifting west looking for purpose. Eleanor shared memories of Philadelphia, of her strict upbringing, of dreams she had abandoned when she married Thomas. "Do you regret coming west?" Jacob asked one evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I regret the circumstances, the choices I made for the wrong reasons, but no, I do not regret being here, not anymore. The West is harsh, but it is also honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. That is a fair assessment." Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about staying on permanently. Cole offered me a partnership in the ranch, a stake in the operation. It would mean putting down roots, building something lasting." Eleanor's heart began to race. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed to think about it, that I had spent so long moving that I was not sure I knew how to stay." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "But the truth is, I'm starting to remember why a man might want to stay in one place, why he might want to build a future instead of just drifting through life." The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken possibilities. Eleanor found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than logic or caution. "Jacob, I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know you just lost your husband, that you have been through trauma and upheaval. I am not trying to rush anything or take advantage. I just want you to know that I am here, and I am not going anywhere unless you want me to." Eleanor reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "I do not want you to go anywhere. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing the kind of man you are, it has meant everything to me. And I know it is too soon. I know I should wait longer to even think about such things, but Jacob, when I am with you, I feel alive in ways I never did before." His breath caught, and he squeezed her hand gently. "Eleanor, I have been half in love with you since the moment I saw you on that platform. So brave and fierce, even in the face of injustice. Every day since has only made it worse. Or better. I am not sure which." She laughed, feeling giddy and terrified and hopeful all at once. "What do we do about it?" "We take our time," Jacob said firmly. "We do this right. I court you properly, the way you deserve. We give ourselves space to be sure, to let this grow naturally. And if, in time, we both still feel this way, then we talk about what comes next." It was the right answer, the honorable answer, and it made Eleanor care for him even more. I would like that. So began a courtship unlike anything Eleanor had experienced. Jacob brought her wildflowers from the prairie, taught her to ride better, and took her on long walks where they talked until the stars emerged. He introduced her to his world, showing her how to read weather signs, how to track animals, how to find water in the desert. She read to him in the evenings, sharing her beloved books, watching his face light up with wonder at stories of far-off places. Cole and Martha watched their growing attachment with approval, often manufacturing excuses to leave them alone together, though always with proper chaperones nearby to preserve Eleanor's reputation. 2 months after their arrival, word came from Tombstone that the territorial governor had launched an investigation into the debt auctions after several complaints from federal officials. The practice was being suspended pending a legal review, and Hoskins had been removed from his position. Jacob's actions, far from making him an outlaw, had apparently sparked a chain of events that would change unjust laws. "You started a revolution," Eleanor teased him when they heard the news. "I just burned down a platform," Jacob replied with a grin. "Though I admit, knowing it led to something good makes the expense feel worthwhile." $2,000, Eleanor said, still awed by the sum. "Where did you even get that much money?" Jacob looked slightly embarrassed. "I told you I drifted for 5 years. What I did not mention was that I saved nearly every penny I earned. I did not drink much, did not gamble, had no dependents. The money just accumulated. I always figured I would use it for something eventually, maybe buy some land or start a small ranch. Turns out I used it for something better." As autumn approached, Bringing cooler temperatures and golden light, Jacob finally accepted Cole's partnership offer. They drew up papers, made it official, and celebrated with a party that drew neighbors from miles around. Eleanor watched Jacob that night, seeing how he belonged here, how the restlessness that had driven him for years had finally settled. Later, when they stole a moment alone under the stars, Jacob took both her hands in his. I know it has only been 4 months since Thomas died. I know by all conventions of mourning we should wait longer. But Eleanor, I also know that life is short and uncertain. And when you find something real, something true, you should not let it slip away out of fear of what others might think. Eleanor's heart pounded. What are you saying, Jacob? He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. I am saying that I love you. I am saying that you are the strongest, smartest, bravest woman I have ever known. I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a home with you, creating a future that belongs to us. Eleanor Hartley, will you marry me? Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a future suddenly bright with promise. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jacob, I will marry you. He stood and kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and passion and promise. It was nothing like the polite pecks Thomas had given her. This was a kiss that spoke of desire and commitment and love, the kind of love she had only read about in novels. They married in October, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with Cole and Martha as witnesses and half the county in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress Martha helped her sew, cream-colored with lace at the collar, and carried a bouquet of autumn wildflowers. Jacob wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and completely smitten. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with such enthusiasm that the gathered crowd cheered and whistled. Eleanor laughed against his mouth, feeling happier than she had ever imagined possible. Their wedding night was spent in the small cabins Cole had helped Jacob build on the edge of the ranch property, a place of their own with a view of the mountains. Jacob was patient and gentle, making sure Eleanor felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together, it was with a passion that left them both breathless and amazed. I love you, Jacob whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I love you too, Eleanor replied, tracing the lines of his chest with her fingertips. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, he corrected gently. I was lost before you, drifting without purpose. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and love. Jacob and Cole expanded the ranch, bringing in more cattle and horses, building their reputation as honest dealers in a territory full of swindlers. Eleanor became known for her education, starting a small school in their home where she taught the children of ranch workers and neighbors to read and write. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Eleanor's first husband, was born in the autumn of 1882. Jacob held the tiny bundle with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. He is perfect, he kept saying. You are perfect. A daughter, Sarah, followed 2 years later, then another son, Cole, named for their friend. Their cabin expanded into a proper house with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a library that Eleanor filled with books ordered from back east. Jacob proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride almost before they could walk. Eleanor often watched him with their children, her heart swelling with love for this man who had risked everything for a stranger on an auction block. As the children grew, Eleanor told them the story of how she and their father met, softening some of the harder details, but making sure they understood the importance of standing against injustice, of fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult or costly. Your father is a hero, she would tell them, not because he fought in battles or faced down outlaws, though he did some of that too. He is a hero because when he saw something wrong, he did not look away. He acted. Consequences be damned. Jacob would always protest these characterizations, insisting he had simply done what any decent man would do. But Eleanor knew better. She had seen the crowd in Tombstone, all those decent men who had looked away, who had let injustice proceed because it was convenient or legal or not their problem. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and love. The children grew strong and healthy. The ranch prospered. Jacob and Eleanor grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, each shared challenge, each quiet moment on the porch watching sunsets. On their 20th anniversary, Jacob took Eleanor back to the spot where they had camped that first night, the rocky outcropping where they had first really talked. They rode the same horses, older now but still sturdy, and spread a blanket under the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked, pulling her close. "The life we built, the choices we made?" Eleanor looked at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and built a world with her. His hair was streaked with gray now, lines creased his face, but his eyes were still that same stormy gray blue that had captured her heart. "Not for a single moment. You gave me freedom, Jacob. Not just from that auction block, but freedom to become who I was meant to be. How could I regret that?" "I burned down a platform for you," he said with a smile. "You burned down my whole old life," she corrected, "and helped me build something infinitely better from the ashes." They made love under the stars that night, their bodies familiar but no less thrilling for it, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor dreamed of auction blocks burning and cowboys riding to the rescue and love that conquered all. They returned home the next day to find their children had planned a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from across the territory. Cole and Martha were there, both elderly now, but still spry and delighted to celebrate the love story they had helped nurture. As the party wound down and guests departed, Eleanor stood on the porch of their home, watching Jacob play with their grandchildren. Young Thomas had married a rancher's daughter from Santa Fe, and they had 3 children who adored their grandfather. Sarah had become a teacher like her mother, and Cole was learning the ranch business, preparing to take over one day. Jacob caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip. He said something to the children that made them giggle, then walked over to join her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Eleanor replied. "About how that terrible day in Tombstone led to all of this." "I prefer to think it was not luck," Jacob said. "I prefer to think it was fate, destiny, the universe pushing us together because it knew we belonged that way." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of the man she loved. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night? About doing the right thing, consequences be damned?" "I do. That is how I have tried to live every day since. Because of you. Because of what you showed me about courage and standing for what matters." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "And you showed me that putting down roots, building something lasting, loving someone with everything you have, that is not weakness or foolishness. It is the bravest thing a person can do." They stood together watching the sun set over their land, their home, their life. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted from inside the house. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of Martha's famous apple pie. Years later, when they were both old and gray, their children grown with families of their own, Jacob and Eleanor would still sit on that porch every evening, holding hands and watching sunsets. They talked less as the years went on, having already said most of what needed saying, but the silence between them was comfortable, full of a lifetime of love and understanding. When Jacob finally passed at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep with Eleanor holding his hand, she grieved deeply but without regret. He had given her 46 years of love, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and a life of purpose and meaning. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half of New Mexico territory, Eleanor stood straight and proud, telling stories of the man who had saved her and loved her and built a world with her. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see her youngest grandchild married, long enough to finish writing the memoir she had been working on, telling her story in Jacob's for future generations. The book, published by a press in Santa Fe, became something of a sensation, inspiring conversations about women's rights and frontier justice and the power of standing against injustice. Eleanor died in her sleep on a cool autumn evening, surrounded by family, her last words a whisper of Jacob's name. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the big cottonwood tree they had planted together their first year of marriage. On the joint headstone their children erected, the inscription read simply, "Jacob and Eleanor Mercer. He saved her. She saved him. Together they built a love that burned brighter than any fire." Their ranch continued on through the generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren. Each generation taught the story of the cowboy who had outbid everyone at an auction and burned the platform because he believed in justice and freedom and love. The story became legend in that part of New Mexico, told and retold, embellished and celebrated, but always ending the same way, with two people who found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful that lasted beyond their lifetimes. The cabin where they first lived together was preserved and eventually turned into a small museum displaying Eleanor's books, Jacob's saddle, and the charred piece of wood he had saved from the burned auction platform in Tombstone. Visitors came from across the territory and beyond to see the place where this remarkable love story had unfolded. But more than the physical artifacts, what endured was the lesson of their lives. That one person, acting with courage and conviction, could change everything. That love was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. That justice and kindness and standing up for what was right, those things mattered more than wealth or status or following unjust laws. In Tombstone, the site where the auction platform had stood remained empty for years, a scorched reminder of that day. Eventually, the town built a fountain there, with a plaque commemorating the incident that had led to legal reforms across the territory. The inscription quoted Jacob Mercer's reported words, "This is what I think of any law that says a woman can be sold like cattle." The story of Eleanor and Jacob became the kind of tale people told their children on cold winter nights, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, even in the unforgiving landscape of the frontier, love could triumph. Their lives proved that the West was not just a place of violence and hardship, though it was certainly those things. It was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where justice could prevail, where love could flourish against all odds. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico desert, old-timers would swear they could hear the sound of horses galloping, a man and woman riding together toward freedom, toward love, toward a future they built with their own hands and hearts. It was just a story, of course, a romantic notion born of legend and nostalgia. But then again, the best love stories always contained more truth than fiction, more heart than fact. And the truth at the heart of Eleanor and Jacob's story was simple and eternal, that love was the most powerful force in the world, capable of burning down injustice, building up hope, and transforming two lost souls into something whole and beautiful and enduring. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, who carried their names and values forward through the generations, but in every person who heard their story and decided to stand up for what was right, to fight for love, to refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. The cowboy who had burned an auction block became a symbol of resistance against oppression. The widow who had rebuilt her life became an icon of resilience and strength. Together they had written a love story for the ages, one that began with fire and courage and ended with peace and fulfillment. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how dark the circumstances, no matter how impossible the odds, love could save us all. Sometimes it took the form of a stranger who refused to walk away. Sometimes it looked like flames consuming symbols of injustice. Sometimes it was simply two people choosing each other every single day, building something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. And that, in the end, was the greatest legacy of Eleanor and Jacob Mercer. Not the ranch they built, not the children they raised, not even the laws they helped change. Their greatest legacy was the proof that love was real, powerful, and transformative. That when someone looked at you and decided you were worth saving, worth fighting for, worth burning down the world for, that kind of love could sustain you through anything. Their story ended as all great love stories do, with two lives lived fully, passionately, and in complete devotion to each other. They had started as strangers on the worst day of Eleanor's life, and had become soulmates who could not imagine existence without the other. From an auction block in Tombstone to a peaceful grave under a cottonwood tree, they had traveled together through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, always hand in hand, always side by side. The West remembered them, history recorded them, love immortalized them. And somewhere, in the vast sweep of stars over the New Mexico desert, two spirits rode together still, free and wild, and eternally bound by the love that had saved them both.